Okay, hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Innovations in Education, eSchool News' bi-monthly podcast that aims to inform and analyze the current state of play in education and technology. My name is Kevin Hogan, and I'm glad you found us. Regular listeners of the podcast may notice a few changes around the place. In the spirit of the new school year, we did try to decide some new features of our own that we hope will engage and maybe even entertain you. In a nutshell, look for more stuff. Executive summaries of the big news from the past few weeks, more concise interviews with the players that are making that news. Also, some more pointers to data that you may find insightful, all posted in one convenient spot on the Innovation in Education webpage. So let's get started. So obviously, the big news so far this month is the return to school. Well, for some anyway. Unfortunately, the pandemic continues to mess things up around the country. We'll leave the embarrassing scenes at school boards to others to cover, but the reality remains that over 100,000 students remain disrupted, either in quarantine, in remote, or some sort of hybrid learning environment. Everyone disrupted because of the masks, whether you're pro or anti. It's a complication, shall we say. Over the last 2 weeks, in just one district, 10,268 students had to quarantine outside of school, according to the data from the Polk County, Florida Public Schools' new COVID-19 dashboard. So as sick as we are talking about it, this giant beta test is still the overwhelming issue facing everyone, students, teachers, parents, and administrators alike. In a desperate attempt to find some sort of silver lining in all this, I talked with Carl Rectanis, and he's CEO of Learn Platform, about a recent report that they dropped on the use of EdTech tools to deal with all this madness. This is their fourth annual year-end analysis of K-12 EdTech and its usage from the 2021 school year. It's called the EdTech Top 40. The data reveals that districts are using, on average, over 1,200 digital products per month, which is up 36% since the 2019-2020 school year, pre-pandemic. So that is showing that people are using these tools to try to, make the best of what we have here. So have a listen. Okay, Carl Rectanis, CEO, founder of Learn Platform. Thanks so much for joining us today.
So glad to be here. Thank you, Kevin.
Before we get into the weeds with your latest release of your report, tell us a little bit about Learn Platform, the work that you do, where it got started and where you are currently.
Sure. Learn Platform is a for-benefit research organization. We started about 7 years ago with a mission of expanding equitable engagement for all students to the teaching and technology that works best for them. We launched Learn Platform, which is a platform used by schools, districts, states, and their partners to organize all of the different education technology to streamline a bunch of processes like contract management, privacy vetting, et cetera, and then rapidly analyze which tools and technologies and interventions are working best for whom and in which situations. And so we've been working with school districts and states that serve over 5 million students, and that number continues to grow. But this particular report, the EdTech Top 40, this is our fourth annual release that we've done, and since we've done it, it's been very popular.
Now, when you started the report, I'm going to suspect you didn't do it with the intention of, marking a pandemic, right? The accelerated use of technologies as it goes through. What has that experience been like?
Well, obviously, pandemics like train crashes aren't scheduled. This has been sort of an amazing period of time in education over the last 18 months. And you're correct. When we started in 2017-18 to release data about what was actually happening across the education technology market, it was an epiphany to many people. To others, it was a very poorly kept secret. Most school district leaders, if you ask them how many EdTech products they're using in a given month, they would usually say, I don't know, 150, 200. Like, we have contracts for that. And, we know our teachers are also using some tools. But even in 2017, that number was over 500 different ed tech products were being used in every school district. And as we move forward, that number continued to grow until, as you mentioned, March of last year, in 2020, we showed that, and since then, that number has exploded to almost 1,300 different ed tech products being used in every school district every month. And it's just astounding that it's reached that height.
Yeah. And one of the interesting aspects, I think, of the report is the way that you categorize the technologies, which is a little different than you see in other sort of rankings or surveys of this sort of thing. You talk about learner focused, educator focused, organization in general, and persuasive. Can you go a little deeper into what those categories mean and why you've kind of put those the way they are?
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, so our team and technology is used by districts and states to organize over 10,000 different ed tech products in the market right now. I mean, that number has grown, but it's, we've reached the 10K mark. And to do so, we need to have a taxonomy that makes it easy for people to understand and compare different categories of tools. They use our system to discover new products or think about what alternatives they might be using, things like that. And so our team, over the number of years, has identified a taxonomy and created a taxonomy that is mutually exclusive but comprehensive to help people understand. So the tools and technologies that tend to have this primary category of learner focused, they're really used very specifically in the process for one individual learner in the process of learning, right? And doing work as an individual. Educator-focused tools tend to be used or activated when an educator or teacher is activating learning across groups of students, right? We would think of that as a classroom. So tools like classroom engagement tools, you see folks like Kahoot or others are high in the top 40, usually activated by a teacher, but engaging with students. And then you've got organization focus. That is school districts, when you're trying to organize teaching and learning across multiple groups of teachers and learners, school districts, for example. So enterprise systems like single sign-on providers, learning management systems would fall into that category. And then, as you mentioned, finally, general and pervasive. These are those tools that may not even be education focused, but are used, pretty pervasively. Things like, I don't know, word processing, right? Google Docs,
Like
YouTube,
administrative back office sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Email systems, things like that that aren't exclusive to education, but are used. But within each of those categories, we've got subcategories, primary and secondary utility and uses. So you're going to see that within the report to be able to differentiate even within those categories.
Interesting. And it seems no great surprises at the top, right? I mean, the usual suspects, a little company that starts with G, kind of dominating the field. But when you look at the report and the results, were there any surprises for you, or any trends that you kind of have seen reach out in the between this year and years past?
Yeah, well, I think you're correct. I mean, I think there's certain players that are not surprising, but there is definitely movement in the market. It's been quite volatile if you compare, pre-pandemic to post. Areas that you'll see growth, no surprise, video conferencing, virtual classrooms. But traditionally in pre-pandemic times, we had a lot more reference or other platforms, whereas supplemental platforms, classroom engagement and instruction, those cracked into the top 40 in a much more active way than in previous years. And I think that's worth taking a look at. We're going to see a lot of trends and changes, especially as we think about hybrid, remote, returning to in-person. We've definitely been watching a lot of that happen over the last year as well.
Yeah. Well, and I'll put you on the spot here a little bit. Put on your or take out your crystal ball, whatever the cliche you want to use. Looking out into the future, when you see the report, do you see any further changes that you might kind of intuit from the results that you see?
Well, I think it absolutely. I mean, I think we've actually activated something called EdTech Insights Pro to be able to dig in deeper beyond just the EdTech Top 40 or a high level work. We look at something called the EdTech 300, which is a barometer of active engagement every day on the 300 most active EdTech products on a given day. It's almost sort of a barometer of what's going on, in a given day. We also see a lot of work going into education equity, right? What we're seeing in different districts, depending on their modality, their demographic makeup, the National EdTech Equity Dashboard has highlighted the differences in engagement for students depending on their district's demographics or wealth. But I think if we look forward, we're going to continue to see more competition and more contraction across groups, and we'll see some shifts, a lot more push into that engagement and inclusiveness area, hopefully more so than we've seen in the past, especially as there's so much investment in infrastructure and broadband. The question of having access is really a 2010 question. Now the question is, are we engaging students? And that, because engagement is a leading indicator of learning. And so that's, I think, where we'll see a lot more interaction across EdTech providers.
Well, Carl, there's a lot of data in here, which it turns into a lot of insights. I look forward to going back and digging in a little deeper into it as we go along. I appreciate the work that you do and that Learn Platform does. I think it's important for people to have an understanding of where this stuff goes, and look forward to your further research.
Thank you, Kevin. I mean, the work that you do is really important, and what we hope this data provides is a shared fact base on what's actually happening in the market. So everybody, whether they're educators, organizations, or providers, can make better decisions based on what their situation is. Thank you so much for sharing this work.
Absolutely. And hopefully, I'll talk to you before next year, but when the report drops next year, hopefully a lot of this pandemic will be in the past tense, the conversation.
We'll knock on wood. I hope so, Kevin. Great to talk with you.
Thank you. How about some more good news? We could all use a little bit more good news, right? Another big segment of today's episode involves the eSchool News K-12 Hero Awards program, something that I had the pleasure and honor to work with. In the past couple of weeks, we just started to drop our interviews with the winners, the three big winners of the program, which involved conversations with educators talking about their heroic stories during this pandemic. It came out of my conversations with these folks starting well over a year ago, talking about how they were helping children with social emotional learning, talking about how they're trying to secure data privacy during a time like this. And another issue was setting up remote network architectures where there never was one before. And I know every district has had a struggle with this, but Navajo Preparatory School was one which has a really extraordinary story. Sean Belkis, the network administrator, spent some time with me describing just the scale and the immensity of what they had to do to take their classroom setups and make them remote. So have a listen. Yeah, talk a little bit about that transition to where, I mean, it sounded like, your network setup was on campus, right? I mean, that there was little to none sort of remote. And so you went from that to completely remote to where you now had new IT staff, which was mom or dad or a guardian or an adult or somebody who had to physically kind of manage the technology in these remote locations, in the kids' houses. Talk a little bit about how that changed the scope of your work.
Yeah, so Yeah, so that's how you put it. You put it the best way there. So basically, our campus network basically extended all the way into Arizona now and the other states. So we had to support all those areas now because our staff was working remote too at that time. So we were all working from home. So all the students had their hotspots and their laptops at home, of course. And they were still at that time. You know, the kids were the kids really helped a lot. I think they really they really did all they could to try to meet us halfway, to try to you know get through it, to finish up that school year. Really, um, we had reports some kids were going on top of their houses just to get a cellular signal with those hotspots, just to download emails, just to upload their homework, or they would drive out to the dirt road where the highway actually is, to try to find that signal where they could send an email or download a message or whatever they needed to do for school. And we still had some students where we had to send out flash drives, and we were back to the old sneaker net days.
SneakerNet, yeah.
There was just some situations where we couldn't push software. We had to deploy software which over their connection. Basically on the low end, some of these kids were getting, I'd say, 1/2 a meg, probably up to 2 megs with those initial devices that we had. So we did all we could. The teachers were still learning to use Zoom. The kids were learning to use Zoom. A lot of them had to do the video off, and they had to call in just to get the audio, because once we started rolling with that, and we kind of got it working to where they could do some class, we got hit by all the data caps on all the cellular devices, so that slowed it down even more. So it was just really, we fix one problem and then another one comes up, and we just had to keep rolling with it. So as our team, we were working from home, so our cell phones were blowing up, and we're just really giving live support to the students and the staff. And we did, at that point, I don't think we really did any driving at that point, because the Navajo Nation was on complete lockdown. So basically there was a curfew. You couldn't be, I think it was like, it closed like around 7 at night. They didn't want anybody on the roads at all. So that didn't help us either with the students trying to get Wi-Fi.
Pretty wild stuff, right? It was a great conversation. Had a number of great conversations over the past few weeks, which we'll be highlighting in upcoming episodes of EdTech Today. Be sure to download the ebook that has descriptions of many of the finalist stories. It wasn't just the top 3, that really every submission that came in had some really interesting insights and ideas, as well as just general feel good to give an example of the hard work and the successes that education and educators have had during this crazy time. So I really encourage you to go to the Innovation in Education webpage. You'll find links to that there. You'll find links to the data that Carl dropped this week with the Learn platform. And you'll also see some references to some other stuff that we have on the site that I think will be helpful. So thanks for your time. Thanks for listening, or thanks for watching if you are. Be sure and find another episode of Innovation in Education up in the next couple of weeks. Thanks. Once again, I'm Kevin Hogan.